Waiting on me? Okay. Well, good morning and welcome to the Maryland Public Service Commission's April 17th, 2019 administrative meeting. We do have a short agenda, but I'm not necessarily going to say it's going to be a brief one today, so we'll see how it plays out. Before we start, I would like to move that we adopt the minutes from the April 10, 2019 administrative meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Madam Secretary, the consent agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first item on the consent agenda, and the only item, is Energy Watch LLC, filed on January 28, 2019, an application to transfer a license to supply electricity or electric generation services in Maryland.
Thank you. Are there any questions from commissioners? If not, is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. For item number 1, I move we grant the company's request to transfer license IR 3991 from Energy Watch Incorporated to Energy Watch LLC to operate as an electricity supplier in Maryland limited to broker services. That we direct the company to provide marketing and training materials specific to its Maryland operations to the Commission staff 30 days prior to utilization of the materials in Maryland, and that we direct the company to file notice with the Commission within 30 days of any changes to the information in the application. And, of course, that we cancel the existing bond of Energy Watch Incorporated.
Great, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Madam Secretary, the administrative.
Moving to the administrative agenda, items 2 and 3 have been deferred, and they will be rescheduled for another administrative meeting. The last item, 4, is Access Community Solar LLC, filed on February 26, 2019. Request for a waiver of operational deadline in COMAR 20.62.0304C.
Okay. How many parties are going to be involved in this? I probably have the company and DPL. I wonder if this might be one we just want to have everybody come to the table.
All right. We could do that. There'd be three. The three parties are all here.
Okay, great. Why don't I have all the parties just go ahead and come to the table now? If you'd like to begin.
Good morning, members of the Commission. Annette Garofalo on behalf of Commission staff. This is a request for waiver of operation deadline by Access Community Solar LLC. Ordinarily, staff's comments in this matter go to whether an applicant has shown good cause to justify a waiver of what is usually an 18-month period. In this case, however, there's a preliminary matter, which is whether Access has timely applied for the waiver. This matter is before you a second time because it was heard in March and not decided finally in order to allow the parties time to assemble full evidence. Access and Delmarva Power and Light Company have each submitted additional information which staff has reviewed. After reviewing the additional information, staff concludes that because Access, by its own admission, received an upgrade in operations letter for a 720 kilowatt interconnection application and returned that application to Delmarva signed. Access's application was complete in August of 2017, in August of 2017, ending its one-year period of operation in August of 2018 and without any extension. Access made no arrangements for additional time in the queue, and for this reason, its time in which to request a waiver has expired. For this reason, and recognizing that both parties may have erred, staff recommends that Access's request for a waiver be denied.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead and hear from DPL, and then we'll let Access, you can go last.
Yes, good morning, Commissioners. Matthew Seegers, appearing on behalf of Delmarva Power. As we indicated in our comments that were filed on April the 15th, the Access Community Solar Project was approved into the Delmarva Community Solar Pilot Program on August 27th of 2017. Under the provisions of our tariff that governs community solar, that started the clock in terms of the 12 months that Access had to get its project operational or to to submit a deposit for an additional 6 months to get its project operational. So in other words, they had until August 28th of 2018 to complete the project or to pay that deposit. We have no record of Access making any such deposit, so their project should have been removed from our pilot program queue by August 29th of 2018. And it was through an administrative error on Delmarva Power's part that they were not removed from the queue. So under the terms of our tariff, we are required to remove Access from the queue unless the commission grants them a waiver. So those are the, one item that I did want to correct in staff's updated buck sheet is that staff seems to indicate in its revised comments that it is the date of the executed interconnection agreement. That is what starts the date. That actually is not correct. As we indicated in our comments, the exact language of our tariff is that if the CSEGS fails to begin operating within 12 months of notice of a completed pilot program application. So it's being accepted into our pilot program. That is what starts the 12-month clock. It's not the date of when an executed interconnection agreement is given.
If I may just respond to that, while we were focusing on the interconnection date, that's because that's the date about which there's dispute. There's no question that Access has a community filed for and received a community solar number, and there's no issue here about whether they did the other parts of the required application, which is to get permission from the counties and other things. So we're focusing on that because there's the need for the completed application to start the clock. I think that's not at odds with what Mr. Seeger said, but he's looking at me like maybe it is. So that's how we view the regs.
Just so I understand the two, so it's the completed application, and that includes the interconnection agreement.
Correct.
Okay, so that's what you were just stating, that the interconnection was completed, or not? It was completed earlier, so therefore the complete application was actually in August of 2017.
What we had from Access was a completed application to take part in our community solar program. And actually, I would note that under our tariff, it specifically notes that in order to apply for our pilot program application, an applicant has to submit a number of documents, but the first of which is a partially executed interconnection agreement. So an applicant does not need to have a totally executed interconnection agreement to apply and be approved into our pilot program. So I'm not sure if I don't think that's consistent with what staff said, but I did want to note that.
Yeah, this has been a matter of confusion since the beginning of this item, and I think it's important we clarify it now. It's very easy to understand if it's simply the application, as Mr. Seegers indicates. But if you have this amorphous kind of malleable date that floats out there because you need all the I's dotted and T's crossed on an interconnection agreement, then it's very difficult to peg a date. So I'm not sure I understand what staff is saying, and the source of confusion seems to have come from the lack of clarity from staff in the beginning of this.
So it's my understanding that the interconnection agreement would not be finalized until the facility is built.
So that's fine. So I go back to the point that it's very easy to understand that if you complete the application, it's a very easy, hard date. The application's completed.
Right.
But if you have this floating interconnection agreement, we don't really know what the date is, kind of interpretation that staff's been giving us and confusing, then it's difficult to figure this out. Do you see why that might be difficult for us?
We think that the applicant needs to apply for interconnection from the company.
Correct.
And the company
That's part of the
needs
application.
and the company then gives them, does a study in many cases, perhaps not all, and tells them how much it will cost to interconnect.
Let me ask
And that
Steph.
is accepted by the applicant.
Let me ask Steph this. Do you agree that once the applicant has applied and they've been brought into the company's system, that that is the start date?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
So just the application. And is there a definition for this partially executed interconnection
What we-
instrument? I mean, what does that mean exactly?
Sure, sure. As part of our interconnection application, what Delmarva Power, and actually this applies for Pepco as well, is we include the actual pro forma interconnection agreement as part of that, of an application. So when a developer wants to apply for an interconnection, they will not only fill out the application, but they will also execute the interconnection agreement. And that takes one step out of the process that we would have to do at a later time. I think what the confusion might be is that we have two separate queues. One that applies for our interconnection process, and then we have our Community Solar Pilot Program queue. Just because you are in the interconnection queue does not mean that you're automatically enrolled in the community solar queue. You actually have to apply and be admitted into that. And just because you may be removed from the community solar pilot queue, that doesn't mean that you're removed from the interconnection queue. You can still interconnect your project. So I just want to make sure that it's clear that those are two separate processes.
So, Mr. Seeger,
Yes.
just again, the date that really matters here is pursuant to COMAR and what your tariff then is based on. COMAR says if a project fails to begin within 12 months of submission of a completed application by the subscriber organization, that's the date that cues off the waiver. Is that right?
That's correct, Commissioner.
Okay. So, and that date is August 28th, 2017, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And does Access disagree that that's the date?
Brad Wilson for Access Community Solar. The company's position is that the completed application happens when the signed upgrade and requirements letter is returned, which we understand that is the interconnection agreement.
Well,
And
can you explain to me why that is? Because when the COMAR and the tariff both say that it's within 12 months of a completed application by the subscriber organization, and you got a letter saying your application's complete. So on what do you base your understanding that the date is different than August
Right.
28th?
The company's asked me to explain that the understanding is that the application is not complete until the interconnection application is complete.
But that's not until, according to, the interconnection application can't be complete until the project's built.
And
we just
the
heard.
understanding is that that point is when the upgrades and requirements letter is returned by the applicant.
Uh-huh. And, that was just your understanding. Did you check with the company? I mean, did the company tell you that was the appropriate date?
No,
Okay. And do you have any other projects in Maryland?
I personally do not know.
You don't know, or you don't have any other projects in Maryland?
I do not have any projects in
You
Maryland.
do not have any other projects in Maryland. So, what you're saying then is it just you didn't understand the rules? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying that, no. I am coming into this project very late personally. I'm here making the statements that, the company's asked me to make, and in the interest of time, I'm certainly available for any other questions, but I think we've sent a letter laying out our case. I believe you all got copies of that, and I think that's all the information that we have to provide at this point in time.
So you don't have any basis for your understanding of the rules versus what appears to be the company and staff's understanding of the rules?
I'm not trying to, that's not the statement I'm attempting to make here. I apologize for being unclear. Our position is that the completed application seems to be when the completed interconnection application is done, and our understanding is that that is the point in time when the signed upgrades and requirements letter is submitted. I don't have any other information to provide at this point in time to support that, and I certainly defer to the discretion of the commission.
So, Ms. Garofalo, is the completed application the date on which any other waiver we've received? Those are the dates that Mr. Seeger described, that the company got a letter saying your application is complete. Has that been the date that the commission has been using across the board with respect to these applications and requests for waivers?
Yes, we haven't had any close calls.
You haven't had anybody else disputing that when they get the letter from the company saying your application is complete, that's when the clock starts?
We have not.
Okay. Mr. Seeger, are you aware of any other disputes that with respect to when the timeline starts?
I'm not aware of any, no, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Why don't we go ahead and let the company, we kind of just started jumping in with questions. Did you have an opening statement or anything you wanted to put on the table before we get into further questioning?
Sure, I appreciate that. Thank you. Maybe first a question for the commission. I know you probably have a lot of material across your desks. Have you had a chance to review the letter that we sent over?
Oh, yeah.
I think that's our opening statement, and don't have anything else to add at this time.
Okay. Did you want to go all through your timeline? Was there anything in the timeline that you presented versus what the company asserts in its letter? Because there does seem to be some areas where you dispute the way things came about.
I think that our timeline matches up factually with the timeline presented by Delmarva. It seems to be a question maybe for the commission to, maybe provide some clarity on at this point is when does the timer begin? As I've stated, the company's position is that that point in time seems to be when the upgrades and requirements letter is signed and sent back by the applicant. That seems to be the point in time that denotes a completed interconnection application. And a completed interconnection application seems to be a requirement of a completed application to the community pilot program. And so there are two different upgrade and requirements letters in this timeline. The first was in August 2017. That was at a later time deemed inadequate or incorrect for some reason. And the correct current operative upgrades and requirements letter was returned in July 2018. And so when we talk about when was the upgrades and requirements letter for the project signed and returned by the applicant, that was July 16th, 2018. The question of whether or not the return of that particular letter is the start of the timer, that seems to be the issue really in question here.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask staff the question I asked before about this partially executed interconnection agreement. Do you have a definition of what that means, since we learned that the full interconnection agreement doesn't go into effect until the project is operating? So does that impact at all where the clock might start? What do you define as this partially executed contract, which I think goes to the point the company is making, Access is making?
No, it would not. So if I could use something that's not community solar, but we have a lot of solar facilities, the small ones that have to also be interconnected. They have to apply for interconnection. Often the utility typically signs off on the interconnection agreement, as does the applicant. Once the facility is installed, let's take a house that installs solar on its rooftop, the utility may or may not come back out to inspect. If they come out to inspect, they will sign and note that they've inspected. And if they don't come out, they that would be considered complete, and I'm not crystal clear. I would have to check with engineering about whether the utility actually signs if they don't inspect, but it's not really complete until the facility is installed. And so with the bigger facilities like community solar, there would definitely be, I would imagine, I'm not sure how many we've had built at this point, but that the utility would not only start the interconnection process, they evaluate what cost would be incurred by the utility, and that would be paid by the community solar.
Right, and that's why I wanted to ask
and-
specifically about the upgrade
Right.
costs, because that could impact the application. The company may come back in that first kind of back and forth on the after they look at the project and they present an interconnection proposal, let's just call it that, or the partially executed interconnection, and it may be a very, very large upgrade cost that may be able to be mitigated by the company if they make some changes. So that's why I'm wanting to ask, is there a point where there could be that the interconnection agreement is still in play, or this partially executed interconnection agreement is still in play as the project developer and the utility work out the conditions?
So I believe the community solar applicant has 5 days to respond. So they're sent something by the utility. It tells them they can or cannot interconnect, and of course, usually they can interconnect, but it will cost an amount of money. And we have had, I'm aware of at least one, there may be many more, community solar facilities who, upon receiving that letter, have withdrawn themselves from the program because of the, I'm assuming because of the cost. Anyway, it's followed that letter. So I think that would be the more typical process.
Okay.
The application for interconnection letter, acceptance of the interconnection letter or not. And in fact, in Access's case, they were given a price for interconnecting at 2 megawatts, but there was not 2 megawatts left, so they had to redesign their facility, is my understanding, and then they were given a new interconnection letter, which I believe had a new interconnection cost.
Right, and that's why I'm asking the question about whether this started the clock or did the clock get started, because there were some back and forth emails about the cost and the invoice, when the invoice would be sent and when it needed to be paid, and that seemed to come after the April 2017 time frame. Is that correct?
I don't think it came after the August 28 date, but we're lucky enough to have an expert on this.
Okay, well,
In the
and the
room.
company jump in on that point.
And
too,
Commissioner,
right? Okay.
I'll let
Or
Mr. Vanderheide
Miguel.
speak, and then I can.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Just to clarify, that partially executed interconnection agreement that's in the tariff, that is the letter that comes after interconnection is made, an application is made, that letter comes back to the applicant telling them what it's going to cost to interconnect. They have to, that's where they see what it's going to cost, and then they decide at that point, am I going to file the other 2 items you need to make a project application. So once that comes back, they sign and agree to pay that. I don't think they're required to pay the money at that point, but then they take the other 2 elements. They need site control and proof of permitting. They put that in a project application. It's received. The utility tells them they have it. That starts the clock. So the point at which they find out how much it's going to cost to interconnect is that initial letter they get from the utility. What we can see from the timeline, which is on the second page of the applicant's letter from last week, shows a timeline. That second letter looks like it was received by the utility August 28th of 2017 with the revised 720 kilowatt information in it. So I think that's what we're looking at. They initially applied for a 2 megawatt facility, that there wasn't enough capacity. Per the tariff that Delmarva has provided in the filing from Monday, they're indicating, and it shows in there that if there's not enough room for you, they'll come back and say, you only have 720 kilowatts in this case. If you want that project, you can have it, and we're going to revise your interconnection cost. That all happened in August of 2017, and so there was a complete application as far as we're concerned, because all of the elements required by the tariff and the regulations were submitted in August of 2017. The information was provided back by the applicant at that time, and they were informed by Delmarva they were in the program.
Okay, and any questions about invoicing? Do you feel that indicates that maybe there's still not agreement, or do you think that that's irrelevant at that point, that that's just an administrative issue?
If there were to be a back and forth about the interconnection cost, the applicant, probably would hold off on filing the project application, because when they file the application to get into the project queue, they have to agree to pay what they're being asked to pay. That they have to sign that. That's part of the agreement, from my understanding. So if they disagreed, if they were being told it's going to cost $2 million to interconnect your system, and they say, well, that sounds wrong, they may attempt to have that communication, but then that would delay their project application. And at the time, there are other project applications that are being considered, and it's first in is accepted. So they have to respond quickly. And it's not my experience that we've seen a lot of questions about. I haven't seen any complaints that they're charging me too much to interconnect. So there may be some back and forth there, but that does not appear to be what happened according to the timeline.
Okay, and on this invoicing issue, so it appears, at least the way I read this, that the invoice for $5,000 was sent in October of 18. After, significantly after, and even after I think it was June 25th, when they were informed that they were not even in the queue. So, I mean, is there any indication there that there was confusion about, whether or not the timeline had begun? I mean, why would the company have sent an invoice that late if it did not believe that it was still a pending issue?
From what I can tell by looking at
They said it was
the timeline that is on the, it's not a numbered page, but it's after the cover letter it's the first item in the applicant's letter from last week, I believe on the 11th. On the first page there, it says 8/28/17. It says Delmarva communicates the 720 kilowatt project has been accepted into the DPL Year 1 program in the open category. So that's our start the clock, and I think you're seeing that the next item is in April of 18, so it's about 8 months after that. And there appears to have been some misunderstanding about what was to happen, or if there was an additional filing to be made. But it looks like there's some additional discussion between the company and other filings. Apparently, there was a request to examine the interconnection again, and perhaps that's where the misunderstanding between the company and the applicant is coming. But it appears that the company believed that they had accepted the project and they had a signed interconnection agreement, or a partially executed interconnection agreement. So why the applicant is making a second interconnection application in April of 2018 is not clear to me. Perhaps they can explain what happened.
Okay, and then the $5,000 check that was cashed by Delmarva, it looks like in August of 2018. I mean, it seems like we're already well late into the game here at this point for this to be an open item, if in fact the clock had already started.
The payment is not required, to my knowledge, with the application, with the community solar project application. They are required to sign that they will pay or agree to the interconnection cost at that point, so that otherwise the utility is not going to go ahead and begin the process of designing that interconnection without having agreement to pay. But my understanding is they are not actually required to pay until that work is done.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Commissioner O'Donnell?
Mr. Wilson, I wanted to ask you a few questions.
Sure.
So, a lot of changes to your project. Went from being an LMI project to an open project. It went from 200 and some projected subscribers to 15. How many subscribers does the company have at this point for this project?
The company has no subscribers.
No subscribers. And explain to me how the financing for such a project works when you have no subscribers as kind of collateral
Right.
to make this project go forward.
Well, subscribers are obviously important for financing, and because that represents the ability to generate revenue for the project. We described some of this when I was here the last time, but you wouldn't want to go out and try to market the project to subscribers if there was any uncertainty about the ability of the project to move forward. That would be disingenuous. And so there has been uncertainty about the status of the interconnection, and then as we got closer to the February 2019 timeframe, now there becomes some uncertainty about the status of the program's place in the year one pilot program queue. And so at this point, the decision for a couple different reasons has been made to hold off on marketing the project to subscribers until these questions have gotten answered. I think there was a period of time after the original August 2017 timeframe where and I was not at the company at the time, I don't have the background information. For whatever reason, there was not communication happening between about August 2017 and April 2018. At that point, the company made a new effort at really re-engaging. Delmarva responded, really opened the lines of communication, and I think you can see in the timeline that re-engaging communication in April 2018 after a period of no communication about the status of the interconnection led to, and it was not a request from the company that a new interconnection study be performed and a new interconnection agreement be proposed. That is something that Delmarva produced. I don't know the reason for that. The interconnection cost actually went up. It was not a request on our behalf because we thought the costs were too high. The cost actually doubled versus the original letter.
So you have no subscribers at this point. How would you characterize Access's ability to gain financing, and what is the cost of this project, ballpark?
What do you mean well, let's start with the last question first. The cost, like the construction cost to build the project. A project like this, I'd say if you get in the ground for $1.05 a watt, you'd probably be doing pretty good. So that's just over $1 million to construction costs.
And how would you characterize Access's ability to line up its financing for this project?
Very strong. So
based on what? You don't have any subscribers?
Well, so what we do have is an agreement with an organization here on the East Coast that aggregates subscribers for community solar projects. And as soon as we give them the green light, they can go out and get, our focus would preferably be a small number of large customers, because that makes the banks happy. And they've assured us that they have lines on.
I'm coming to the kind of gradual belief, correctly or not, that a lot of these waiver requests have at their core not weather or not clerical errors or other delays, but relate actually to the financing of these projects. So that's just kind of where my thinking is evolving to. That's right at the heart of this.
Right. I would say that you're probably on the right track. Again, financing requires certainty. This is a case where, at a couple different times in the project's timeline, there have been unanswered questions leading to uncertainty, and you can only take certain steps in the development timeline when you have that certainty. So
I appreciate that. I appreciate your frankness, and it's important for us to understand this is a pilot. It's a 25-year pilot, but it's a pilot, and it costs a lot of money. And I'm not sure that everybody completely understood how this worked on the financial end of things when it was started. But thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Linton.
Thank you. I had actually had a couple questions for Delmarva Power regarding your comments regarding the administrative error. Could you tell me if there were other companies that were impacted by that, aside from Access?
Other companies in terms of any other developers who...
Any other developers?
I believe that there were some developers behind the queue, behind Access. What will happen now is year one has been closed, and the wait list is no more. So there is no more wait list associated with year one. Under the terms of our tariff, what will happen is that if Access's request for a waiver is not granted, then what our tariff provides is that that available capacity will roll over to the open category for year two, and then it will be offered to whomever is in the is first on the wait list for the open category.
And do you have
That is-
companies on the wait list for year two and for that?
I believe that we do, Your Honor. Yes, we do.
All right.
The open category is usually is the first to go, Commissioner. So there's it. So yes, we do have companies on the wait list.
Okay. All right. And I guess along those same lines, for the commission staff, the comments that you presented, I don't know what the date was, but I think we just received them. You referenced a situation that could arise annually and may affect other CSEGs. Could you explain a little more what you meant by the situation? Were you just talking about this administrative issue or something else?
So the reference was to the fact that the pilot program had been 3 years, so we've done year two, and there's only one more year, but now it's a 25-year pilot, assuming that the legislation's been signed. And so, and Delmarva is a very desirable area in which to be. There's land there. I don't know that the land is expensive. I guess maybe it's sunny. There's a lot of competition for the Delmarva service territory. So we think that probably every year when bids are done and people try to get into the queue, there may well be more applicants for the Delmarva queue than there is capacity. We haven't dealt with anything past year three, but since year two has, I believe it's 5 applicants who did not make it into the Delmarva queue but applied to be in the Delmarva queue for year two. This is so we want to set the right precedent here for something that could come up every year for the next, let's call it 20 years.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers your question, but that's...
No, it does. I wanted to specifically just make sure that there wasn't a series of other CSEGs out there that were impacted by the same administrative error, and the staff knew that, and we're just letting us know that we're going to get more situations like this. But
I personally don't know about who was on year one and didn't get in. I don't know if anyone on staff knows that.
okay. All right. Thank you.
Another follow-up, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
How many waivers might be in queue with staff right now, filed at the commission for operational deadlines?
I believe we have one, but it's not. I'm not certain it's for an operational deadline. It is more complicated than usual. It's Cypress Creek, and they're asking. I think they're asking for something either other than or in addition to an operational deadline
I
extension.
just try to keep a sense of,
Yeah.
excuse me, Commissioner.
No problem. Good.
Mr. Erman?
So, Mr. Seegers, I want to re-ask Commissioner Linton's question because I'm not sure it was answered.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any other solar companies who you failed to notify within the 12-month period by saying, hey, you're coming off the queue? This administrative error that the company is saying occurred. Were there any other companies that happened to?
Where, just so I understand, your question, Commissioner, were there any other companies where we essentially did not say, hey, your 12 months is coming up, and if you don't pay a deposit, we'll remove you from the
Right.
queue? Is that correct?
Yes.
No, Your Honor. We have checked, and this is, I'm very thankful to say this is a one-time error.
Okay,
So-
and has the company made any changes in its procedures to make sure this doesn't happen again, that you would send out the notices?
In terms of changes, we have essentially what led to this is the original personnel who is set up the community solar program. They unfortunately did not enter this program into our internal list of approved community solar projects, and then that person unfortunately retired. So the new personnel who came in did not have a record of this being approved on our pilot list.
Right,
So
but have you instituted checks and balances to make sure that programs do get entered properly?
Yes, we have, Your Honor.
Okay.
Yes, we have.
All right, and so Ms. Garofalo, based on the tariff that is in your comments, your March 12th comments, on Comar 20620304C, who has the burden on the 12-month period to begin paying? Is the burden on on Delmarva, or is the burden on the developer?
Delmarva the applicant has the burden of responding to the company within 5 days. The company has the burden of doing a preliminary interconnection study and sending them an estimate. And in this case, which was a rather unusual case, they also, with that, sent them notice that they could they would have to put them on the wait list for year 2 if they wanted to remain at 2 LMI, but they could accommodate them for the size that they eventually decided
Right,
on.
but I'm asking about who has the burden under, if a project fails to begin operating within 12 months of submission of a completed application, the electric company shall remove, which did not happen, or they would have to pay which didn't happen, unless the subscriber organization provides the electric company an additional deposit. Who has the burden there on unless the subscriber organization provides the electric company?
I don't think we thought that far in advance. We assumed that each would be operating in their own interest.
Right.
The CSEG would try and get additional time, and the company would try and keep its queue in order.
Gotcha. Okay. So, Mr. Wilson, I'm looking at your submission at what you call Access Background 06 PDF.
Apologize, I might have to pull that up on my laptop.
No problem.
Which page of that exhibit, please?
Well, I'm going to start on the second page, which is the Wednesday, August 23rd, 2017, Community Solar Delmarva. See
Okay.
that one, which is you? At the bottom of the page, it says, I'm sorry, that's Delmarva wrote to you, by returning the signed upgrade and operating requirements letter, you are eligible to submit via email a CSEG's pilot program application for this generating facility, right?
That is what it says, correct?
Right. And then your response, moving over to the first page, says, please see attached on behalf of Access Community Solar, indicating our intention and application through the pilot program, right?
That's correct.
And then Delmarva says, on the top of the page there, your project has been accepted into the open category, right?
That's correct.
Okay. But what I believe you've said is that you believe that the upgrade and operating requirements letter is the application for purposes of when the date starts. Is that right?
It's part of a completed application, and in this case, it would have been the last part that creates a completed application to have been submitted.
I'm having a hard time based on your own documents by that, because it says here, you say, okay, here it is, and then now I'm going to make my application, and Delmarva accepts your application. But you're saying that wasn't really your application, even though your document says, here's our application.
I apologize if I'm not tracking your question correctly, and if I'm repeating something that I've already stated. It's our understanding, and I believe I heard the gentleman at the podium back here maybe confirm that this was his stance as well, that not a completed interconnection agreement, because we know that happens at the end of a project's construction, but a completed interconnection application is part of a completed community pilot application. And a completed upgrades and requirements letter is part of a complete interconnection application. So I kind of wish I had a whiteboard I could draw, but at the very top we have a complete community program application. Number of materials are required for that. One of those materials is a completed interconnection application. A number of materials are required for that. One of those materials is a completed upgrades and requirements letter. And we're stating that the upgrades and requirements letter for this project was not received, was not sent by DPL until July 3rd, 2018, and was not returned by Access until July 16th, 2018.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can I follow up on that line of question?
Sure.
Mr. Wilson, what would prohibit an applicant from extending the process for years under your interpretation, because all of the required components of an application have not been submitted? I mean, it seems contrary to the way we structured the first 3-year tranches of this CSAKES program, because there's a limited capacity. Some applicants are queued up because they can't get in. You got in under the wire, but theoretically, you could delay your application process for an indeterminate amount of time based on your interpretation.
I don't think so, because I believe that the applicant is required to respond within a certain time frame upon receiving the documents from Delmarva in this case. So the upgrades and requirements letter is sent by DPL to the applicant. I believe the applicant has to respond within a certain amount of time.
Well,
can't just sit on it indefinitely.
But anyway, no matter who does it, this process, you don't want to start the toll until this upgrades letter is sent. But everything that happens before that, no matter who controls it, could be expanded infinitely.
Well, I think that the applicant doesn't even apply to the community program until the upgrades and requirements. It's a part of the application in the first place, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe, and maybe
You're
I'm
getting
missing-
back into the space of we don't know when this really starts.
Yeah.
The tariff says clearly when it starts.
Well, and maybe I should ask for a little bit more clarification. I feel like maybe there is an understanding that this starts when a completed community solar application is submitted, and that a complete application requires a complete interconnection
But
application.
completed interconnection isn't even until the whole thing is
I'm not saying a
constructed.
completed interconnection agreement. I'm saying a complete interconnection application, which I do believe is a requirement of the community application.
If I might, Commissioner, I'm sorry.
I don't mean to.
We're 2 years beyond when you originally applied for this. Do you think we intended for these projects to be 2 years out and then requesting waiver?
I don't believe so at all. The statute clearly defines a 12-month period.
All right.
If I might, Commissioner, and this also follows up on Commissioner Herman's question. In on first revised leaf number 92C, of our tariff, which was included with our filings. It specifies there exactly what needs to be included with a completed community solar application. And the only thing there that's related to the interconnection process itself is the partially executed interconnection agreement. All of the other parts are proof of application for all applicable permits, proof of site control, selection of category, evidence of brownfield status. So there's nothing in here that says that you need to submit, as part of your community solar pilot application, a completed interconnection application. The only thing that's here is the partially executed interconnection agreement itself, which, as I mentioned before, normally for our processes, that is part of the interconnection application that is submitted right off the bat.
Thank you.
Commissioners, Kevin Mosher on behalf of staff, just real quickly to sort of follow that up. COMAR 20620304 states that as part of the application, it specifically says an executed interconnection agreement. Hopefully that clarifies it. It says executed, not completed, is what is required as part of the application.
Which
A
means...
comment from me that I worry that provides even more confusion because
Yeah.
that doesn't say partially executed, that says executed, which would entail both parties signing off on it, which I'm not making that argument at this time. I'm just saying that as unclear.
Yeah, I would agree. That's unclear to me, too, what you've just added by saying executed as opposed to partial application.
I apologize for the confusion. I was hoping that would clarify, because again, that just...
Well, I would just say that staff would interpret that as what was sent to what the company sent to Access, signed, and then Access signed that on their behalf and returned it to the company. We would call that an executed interconnection agreement. The agreement's executed, they agree to pay, there's an agreement on the size. It's not completed interconnection because the facility's not built.
Is that the upgrades and requirements letter?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would submit that, notwithstanding the specific COMAR language where it says an executed agreement, Delmarva Power has, we tailored our specific community solar language to basically reflect our process, whereby it's the customer that signs the interconnection agreement at the beginning of the process, and then the utility will sign it later on in the process. So in this particular case, I would submit that if the COMAR language is interpreted to mean that both the utility and the customer have to sign the interconnection agreement, I would submit that by approval of our tariff language, the Commission is granted an exception in our case. So that is, I still don't see a conflict between what the Commission approved in terms of what our tariff says.
Mr. Ziegler, I wanted to I guess follow up on the question Commissioner Linton asked, maybe from a different perspective.
Okay.
You said that while this didn't impact these errors, basically these problems that happen within the company administratively, didn't impact other companies. Obviously, it's potentially having a dire impact on this company, this applicant. I'm just interested to know who some of these individuals were, because it appears, just looking at the email chain, that there were a number of, at least several, Delmarva employees that are listed or are part of this process from beginning to well into the process. One is Green Power Connections, an Exelon company. Is that a Delmarva company, or what exactly is Green Power Connections?
Our Green Power Connection Commissioner is it's essentially our team that handles renewable interconnections like solar, and they are dedicated to handling the interconnection applications and agreements that are entailed with those kinds of requests.
So this would be the expert team that handles this type of an interconnection, the solar, and were they also up to speed on what was going on with the community solar program?
But they are involved in the management of our. Well, I shouldn't say they were not involved in the management. They are involved, obviously, in the interconnection portion of the community solar pilot program. We actually have another individual, actually the individual sitting behind me, who manages our community solar queues for both Pepco and for Delmarva Power. So, but he works very closely with our Green Power Connection team. Because they're the ones who obviously are processing the interconnection applications, who are coming up with, and then it's our engineering departments who are coming up with, they do an engineering review of completed applications to see what kind of upgrades will be needed on our distribution systems, and they're the ones who come up with the cost estimate letters that are then presented to the interconnection customers, saying here's how much it's going to cost to interconnect to our distribution systems. So essentially there's, I would say, 3 different departments that are involved here. There's the Green Power Connection team, there's our engineering department, and then there are the people who are managing our community solar pilot process.
Okay, and there are several names. I don't know if Ms. Phillips, Mr. Swank, Mr. Millay. Again, you see their names throughout the whole email chain from beginning of the process to the end. And even during this period where, apparently the company should not have been in the queue any longer. In fact, Ms. Phillips even had said the company should not have been, Access should not have been in the queue. Yet they continued to work with this company after that, which I think I would posit sowed a lot of confusion with the company as to what their standing was, as they were continuously asking what their standing in the process, as they were continuously seeking guidance on what the next steps were. Respond to that. It just seems like a lot of balls were dropped here, and right now the company is kind of left trying to figure out where why they weren't maybe led in a better way through this process, why was that?
Sure. Well, essentially what happened, as I mentioned before, is the individual, and I would prefer not to mention individual names, Commissioner, but
they're in the public record, so I
okay.
thought,
Well, it was Mr. Swink who originally was processing our community solar pilot project queue. Unfortunately, due to administrative oversight, he did not enter this project as part of our approved community solar projects on our internal list, and then he retired and left the company. Our new personnel, which includes Mr. Brown sitting behind me, they came in, and then we unfortunately did not hear from Access from August 28th of 2017 until April of 2018. I know
they assert that they had phoned, and the whole record
Understood.
shows that there are a lot of examples before and after that 8-month period where there were a lot of phone calls. So
Understood.
Again, I don't know why suddenly everything went dark between that 8-month period, but go on.
And unfortunately, we do not know either, Commissioner. We do not know who they were calling. We have checked, and we do not have any records of us receiving any phone calls. When Access, when they did finally email our community solar email box, which is indicated in the emails from 2017, there's language that specifically says, in order to ensure response, please email our community solar mailbox. When they finally did that in April of 2018, they received a response within 48 hours. So why they did not email earlier, that I do not know, Your Honor. But once we were contacted, our personnel did not, they weren't aware of this project. So that's why there was an effort to try and relook at it. Out of due diligence, they also restudied it. And then another another upgrade cost estimate letter was issued. And in fact, it had a different amount for a deposit The second letter had a $70,000 deposit. The first one was a $30,000 deposit. The first one being the one that was issued back in 2017. And the reason for the difference was because, and it's my understanding, that as part of the original interconnection, Access was going to install its own transformer. However, the second time around, Access they requested that Delmarva install the transformer, which we're willing to do if a project is less than 1 megawatt. So that was the reason for the difference in the cost between the two letters. So and then, but in terms of why they were not removed from the queue, Commissioner, again, it was an unfortunate administrative oversight on our part, and we have the checks and balances in place to make sure that this does not happen again.
Okay.
So I hope that answers your question.
Well, yeah, it does. It just seems like they weren't removed, but it just seems in this process the communications just broke down, and it seemed to be just as much on Delmarva not getting back to Access as the other way around. That would just be my observation. Can I ask just Access one last question? Can you tell me a little about your company? Your headquarters looks like in Minnesota. That's where. Have you done other projects that you can tell us about? Have you been involved in the Solar Garden program in Minnesota?
Sure,
sure. And also, why Maryland? Why did you want all the way from Maryland to Minnesota to Maryland?
I'm going to try to answer as briefly as I can. So Access is a project-specific entity under the umbrella of a larger company called National Renewable Solutions. National Renewable is historically a wind project developer and has done a lot of large 150, 200 megawatt wind projects, and wanted to begin exploring adding solar development to their portfolio as well. They were back in 2017 pursuing a small wind project on the Maryland Peninsula that ended up not going anywhere. I think there was some sort of a moratorium that came along. But the landowner they were working with was actually on some sort of commission or working group that developed the community solar pilot program and said, hey, you guys already have a presence out here in Maryland. You want to try one of these? And so that generated the interest there. Personally, I was brought on to the company in late January this year. I am a solar developer by trade, 9 years experience, and I personally have a lot of experience with ground-mounted projects like this, community projects like this. The company specifically, this is a little bit of a newer deal for them.
Okay. All right. Are there any other?
Just, Mr. Seegers, just to be fair, you cited in your communications from Mr. Swink, the company's communications from Mr. Swink, to ensure a response, please send all correspondence to communitysolar@delmarva.com, right?
Correct.
But the sentence before that, just to be fair, says if you have any questions or concerns, please call 202-872-2430. So you invite the applicant to call. So I wanted to be clear and fair about that. It's not just...
Understood, Commissioner.
Could I make one quick comment? Just in, I want to make clear that by no means do we want to cast any aspersions or on the staff at Delmarva. Since coming on board in January, all the interactions I've had with staff over there have been exemplary. I think it's a great team. My understanding here was that, between August 2017 and April 2018, it seems to be that Access staff were attempting to contact an employee that was no longer with Delmarva, and I think that's what drove the blackout period there. I think it's a great team over there, and I don't want to come across as if we're trying to throw, any personnel there under the bus. That's not the case.
Appreciate that. Thank you. All right. With that, do commissioners want to have any discussion at this point? Sure. Yeah, Commissioner Herman.
So I think we have a number of issues here. I think Delmarva, didn't do what it customarily does. But I do believe that the burden is on the applicant when they have a completed application to contact the company and say, okay, I want to start my 6 months and pay my, my $50. And I think that burden, while Delmarva does customarily send out a letter, I don't think it's Delmarva's responsibility to maintain this timeline other than to take them off the queue, which they didn't do, but that gave the applicant some additional time, frankly, to try to get this resolved. I think that you're well beyond the date. I think that your position that you believe that this the signed upgrade and operating requirements letter is the same as the application is just not consistent with the language of the communications from Delmarva or from Access saying that it was making the application to Delmarva, and then the materials that came back that say congratulations, you've been accepted. So I think it's difficult for me to accept the argument that you didn't think you had a completed application when in fact there's a very clear document that says that you did. I'm concerned if we were to grant the waiver that we are creating an opening for other entities to come in with arguments that, I didn't have a completed application, and it does not appear, based on the other waivers that we've seen and the other communications that we've seen, that we've had the same kind of communication with respect to the date as to when do we have a completed application. And we've had a number of requests for waivers based on those dates. And so for us to open that date causes me grave concern. So on that basis, I would say that I would move to deny the waiver.
I would, Mr. Chairman, concur with Commissioner Herman. There's enough confusion in this matter. Nobody's hands are clean here, but the burden is on the applicant, and we set some maybe aggressive timelines associated with this pilot and these projects, but maybe a little too aggressive. But the burden is still on the applicants to move these projects forward. I hope Access will continue to attempt to operate in the CSEGS program in the state of Maryland, but in total, I don't see a reason to grant this waiver at this time. So I will support denial as indicated by Commissioner Herman.
Okay. I would agree with both of my colleagues. I think that in terms of just looking at even the timeline and some of the other information that was provided, from a strict reading of COMAR and the company's tariffs, it's obvious that the application was in at a particular time and the times have already run. I am concerned about the time period between August and April, August 2017 and April 2018, when there's clearly some movement within the company. And I expressed earlier concern that might have impacted other companies, and as of right now, at least, we don't think it has, but I guess we'll know in the future if it has or hasn't. But I think that that can cause some frustration for a company. I do think that there's a burden on the company to be more aggressive at that point. And clearly there wasn't any marketing, there's no outreach, there's no customers. So it's clear that they didn't know what the status was. And I think that at that point, the company will start to shake the tree, to get as much information as you can. If you don't hear from one of these employees, you call somebody else and you keep trying. But I'm glad that they were at least here and willing to pursue this waiver. And similar to Commissioner O'Donnell, I hope that you will remain in Maryland. I think Delmarva is a nice service territory too, so I think that there's a lot of opportunity there to continue in this program, especially since we know at least our General Assembly has committed to this for an extended period of time. So there should be some opportunities to continue to explore this pilot, and hopefully we'll get some good information out of it.
Well, I guess the good news, we're not going to be tied, but I will say, I would grant the waiver. I really think that in this case, Delmarva really dropped the ball. This is an important state policy, and I think it's just disappointing that a lot of the confusion was sowed in the process. I don't think it was malicious, but at the same time, it has caused this company, obviously, a dire consequence. I think this company has shown that it has been exemplary in trying to actively pursue this project. There's good you look at the email record, I think they did all they could as a company really to actively engage. They've also put, I think, significant resources into this project. They have secured some local support. Also, I would just say that this is a pilot. And so I think to really be so strict with our rules at this point, when I think it's as much as something to learn about what the companies are doing as the types of rules that we should have going forward. So, for that, I'm a little disappointed that, given that we had to ask so many questions about exactly when does the clock start, I think alone says something about, the ambiguity of our rules going into this. Also, I think it was mentioned, this is an important state policy. We need to have these projects. Our legislature has just increased our requirements. So I think any delay in trying to get a project that's ready to go, I think it's a shame. So with that, I'll conclude. But again, I would be on the side to wish we were granting the waiver today. So with that, is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I move that we deny the waiver.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And I oppose. With that, our business is done. We are adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your consideration.